Welcome to Filmfluence, your one-stop shop for everything film. We're starting up a series of streamlined tutorials here on this channel, where the goal is to evaluate editing tips and techniques in such a way to not only give you instructions on steps A through Z, but to look at each step in a logical way and teach you the why behind the how, which will hopefully increase the effectiveness of each tutorial and boost your progression as an editor and even more so a filmmaker. Today's tutorial, we will be going over handwritten text animation. Now, this is one that I've always found odd workflows and techniques on the interwebs. I'd probably describe them as less than efficient or less than effective. They take a little bit too much time. You give up a little bit of control with these techniques. You're not able to get as customized as you would probably like to do, especially with handwritten stuff. So this is kind of a technique that just by happenstance, me and a coworker stumbled upon and developed in our day-to-day work. At first glance, this might seem a little tedious. It might be a little scary to you just by glancing at the start of the process, but let me assure you, it is incredibly easy. It doesn't take that much time. One thing I might notate to you guys is if you don't have a pen tablet, don't stress about it. You don't have to have a pen tablet to do this technique. I just use my pen tablet because it makes it a little bit easier. It can sense, how hard you're pressing. And in my opinion, it looks more organic when you're doing graphics. Every single one of you guys need to own a pen tablet at some point because it just unlocks a superseded level of abilities that you never really thought about. Just keep that in mind. It's not necessary for this tutorial, but I would definitely recommend it. Even if it's just like a $30, $40 pen tablet that doesn't show you a display and it just hooks up to your computer. Those exist. The one that I have is not even that expensive. It's like $300. So definitely go check those out. I'll put a link in the description. But the point of this tutorial is to stay short, concise, and informative. So let's jump right in. Go ahead and set up your project the way you like it, whatever dimensions you want to work with. I'm just working with a 1920 by 1080, 72 pixels per inch. I'm going to assume moving into the tutorials that we're going over that you're going to have a base knowledge of the layout of Photoshop, the layout of After Effects, the layout of Premiere Pro, just moving forward through these tutorials. But anyways, we're going to go ahead and make a new layer. Now, easy way to do that, Control-Shift-N, name it whatever you want to. I'm just going to keep it generic as layer 1. That's just the quickest way to do it for me. So boom, layer 1. Pretty easy. Now, this little folder icon down here, click that. It's going to create a group. You're going to put it in the group. Now you can title this group. Let's just call it text. Now, the reason I love this technique so much is because if you don't have very good penmanship, this will still work for you. And again, if you don't have a pen tablet, it will still work for you. If you're using a mouse and keyboard, go up here to the smoothing and just make sure it's turned all the way up, or at least roughly halfway or above, just to help you with kind of smoothing out your text. But for me, any setting pretty much works. It still helps a little bit. If you want it to be more handwritten like, you can turn the smoothing down. It just depends. Really personal preference, whatever you want to do. Now, how we start this technique off is you want to select the first layer. And before we jump into this, I want to explain it a little bit. The reason that it's so hard to animate handwritten text is because you're working with, if you're in After Effects, a text layer. And text layers are not separated by brush stroke. It's just one giant cohesive layer of text that's all blended together. So there's no way to separate like the left side of an H from the right side of the H unless you use masking or some sort of layer map and stroke effect, which those obviously have their place on when you want to use those. But this technique takes that out of it. It gives you full control over every stroke. So if you are a decent artist as far as penmanship, then you could just write this out yourself. But for me, and I think it would be beneficial even if you are good with your penmanship to use this method here. I use the text tool So it's right here. You see it? Nice. You just click, okay? And we're gonna type in whatever our model text is. Whatever you're wanting to animate, go ahead and type that out, but make sure it's laid out the same way that you would want it to be in your final product. So let's just go ahead and write, don't subscribe. Actually, I'm probably gonna make this all caps because I really like all caps. Don't subscribe to Filmfluence. All right, there you go, right there. Now we're gonna select this. Now this, whatever font you use is not important necessarily unless you're trying to replicate that similar style of the font. This is typically just to get your spacing correct and a general framework so you're not scribbling unproportionate words that either curve up, curve down, or get out of whack some way or another. So this is really just your default template that you're using to trace over. Now, increase that to whatever size you want there. I'd probably say that's fine. We'll mess with the text here a little bit. Okay, sweet. Now this can be whatever scale you want it to. You can always scale it up or down once you bring it to the After Effects side of things. I just kind of just doing a generic template here for you for right now. Now I wanted to use something that had a variation of letters because certain letters you're going to write them out in a different way. And don't let that frighten you. It's really not that complicated. But if you see the S here is going to be animated differently. The U is going to be animated differently. And the way, what I'm trying to say is, you know, with an N, the N is going to be 3 different layers. With the D, it's going to be 2 different layers. With an O, it's going to be 1 layer. With an S, it's going to be 1 layer because it's just 1 pen stroke. But there's certain letters that you will animate with just a mask because it's easier to do that way instead of trying to cut an S in half and then draw it the way you want to. It's just easier to quickly animate like 2 keyframes and animate that in that way. So keep that in mind. I'll try to point it out as I'm going along, but I wanted to have all of these different letters to kind of give you an example of that. So now moving forward, this is our text example. We're going to drop that out of our group. We don't need that in the group. You can also take the opacity here, drop it down. Color doesn't matter. This is just to kind of fill in and give us a guide to work off of. We're going to zoom in real nice and tight here. Okay. Now I actually noticed one thing here that I didn't think about beforehand, which is this background color is actually white and the text is black. In the final composition that I'm rendering out, I actually have a black background. So that would have kind of ruined my whole ordeal here. So let's just, before you move into doing your text, keep note of whatever design and color that you're going to be using for the background and the text, just so you know you set it up to kind of match that. Okay, so I fixed my color here. Now we can go ahead and begin with our brush strokes. So the reason we made the group is we want all of our brush stroke layers to be within our group layer. So when we drop the Photoshop file into After Effects, we can just locate that folder and drop it into After Effects. And within that group, we can do all the animation as far as the pen strokes. So let's go here, select layer. Now, when starting this, you want to figure out what kind of brush you want to use. Do you want to use something like, obviously that's not what we're doing here. So do you want something like that? You want to use something like a chalk, you know, whatever you want to use, figure it out. For this, honestly, so for this one, I'm just going to use a traditional, I think it's called, it's just something that people use for drawing. Find a decent size, something that somewhat matches. Let's see, a little bit smaller there, maybe like 21. Yeah, cool. So figure out what size you need, what brush you need, and this is where we're going to start. Now I'm gonna turn the smoothing up just a little bit, maybe turn it up to 52. Make sure your flow's at 100%, opacity at 100%, and we're just going to start this off. Now, this is gonna seem like it'll take a while. This is where it gets a little bit scary. But on your pen tablet or with your mouse, either one, I'm using my pen tablet, I'm going to go through just like I would actually write the sentence and make one little line. Boom. Now, again, this is to model this text. If you want to do something cursive, you can do that. If you want to do something with crazy cool calligraphy, you could do that too. That's why I like this technique. Whatever you want to do, if you have a text that you're like, okay, this is the sort of text that I want to do, you can use that as a template and then just build off of it. So you don't have to follow it line for line, dot for dot, but the playing field is open. You can do whatever you want. Step 1, draw a line. Okay. That's more of a handwritten look, kind of just one straight line down. I'm not completely following the dynamics of the preset text here because obviously it's a little bit crooked. That's fine. I kind of want more of a handwritten look. Now, quick way to do this. Draw one stroke, Control Shift in. Boom. Make sure you're in the group before you press Control Shift in. Press enter. It's going to make a new layer. Now, draw another stroke. And it might take a while to get exactly what you're looking for. That's fine. Boom. Okay, nice. Now for an O. O's are kind of annoying in the animation process, so sometimes I just like to kind of leave either kind of a swirly with an opening because this is one you mask, or you can keep it closed. It's up to you. Experiment around a little bit until you get something you want, and you'll kind of get the hang of it as you go along. Control Shift in, new one. Okay. For an N, it has 1, 2, and 3, right? So that'll be 3 layers. For this, it'll be 1 and 2. And then for a T, it'll be 1 and 2. A U is just 1 layer unless you have a little twig out to the side here. An S would be 1 layer. A B would be 1, 2, 3. An S would be 1 layer. A C would be 1 layer unless you add something here at the top. U again, L 2 layers, F 3 layers, E is 4 layers. So you get kind of the gist here. You're just separating each brush stroke individually. Now, I'm going to go ahead and do these for you and time it and let you know how long it took me to do this, just so you know it doesn't take hours and hours to figure this out. That took me a total of 6 minutes and 22 seconds to do a simple handwritten text using that method. Now, of course, we're not done. That's just the layer side of things, but that's all of the Photoshop workflow already done. 6 minutes. Okay, you're going to save it. You're going to name it whatever you want to, put it wherever you want to. You want to import it as a composition. Make sure it's editable layer styles. Press OK. Cool. Now, if you look here where I imported it, you have all of the layers within that Photoshop file right here. And here you have the actual composition. Now, this is the way I always do it. You don't have to do it this way, but what I usually do is I'll just drag in the composition. You don't need the text layer that you traced. You don't need the background layer. You don't need any of that. You just need the group layer that contains all of your pen strokes. So we'll just start at about a second, somewhere in there. Scroll to the very bottom on layer 1, because you know that's your first layer. Now I usually keep these at 1 frame long, so I'm not usually doing this part of the animation unless I need it specifically for this or that project. But I want to teach you this just in case you need to know. If you wanted this to come over 2 frames, 3 frames, 4 frames, 5 frames, whatever you want to do, typically 1 to 2 frames is best, I think, per pen stroke, depending on the size of the text. But you could just select it, and on that first frame, mask out half of it. Press M, scroll down here, mask path. You want to keyframe it, right? Page down, go 1 frame. Bring the mask down. Boom, boom. Now it's 2 frames. Okay, so keep that in mind. Moving through this, if you need to use masks to slow it down, if it seems a little fast, you can do that with the strokes. But this actually enables you to use masks without affecting all of the other pen strokes. Because if you had a layer that had all of this affected, then this mask would be so tedious to try and not get this handwritten part and not get the little area here. And how would you do that? Well, that's why we separated all the pen strokes so that you can only affect that one. Now, I'm going to go through a couple of these real quick, animate them in. So let's enable all of our layers once again. Okay. And I'm not going to do the mask method for this because my speed, I want it to just be 1 frame per pen stroke. It animates in, starts at 1 second, boom. So now what do? Okay, we're gonna go forward another frame. Select your layer, the next pen stroke, Control-Shift-D, select the previous layer, where it splits, delete it. So now you have 1, 2, okay? Now, I know that doesn't look like it's actually being written. Again, that's why I showed you the mask method if you need to do that, if it's super close or something like that. But when you're writing it so quick, the way this animates out, it actually looks like it's being handwritten. So there's D. I'm not just gonna go to the very next frame and start the O. Because if I do that, it's gonna be 1, 2, 3. We don't want that. So what I've learned is giving about 2 frames of space between each letter and 3 frames of space between each sentence is a good medium to use. So instead of going 1, 2, 3, we're gonna go from that frame to 1, 2. Okay, so now it goes 1, 2, space 1, right? So there's 1 frame of space before it reaches the O. Now here's what I was talking about. The O's are a little difficult, which is why most of the time I leave space or gap or something that I can use a mask for, because O's are ones that you always use a mask. O's, S's, U's, there are a few other letters, I think. But these are 1-stroke letters that when you just leave them as 1 frame pop in, it can seem a little jarring. So usually I have to spread them out between 2 frames anyways. So what we do is I'm just going to make a mask here for half of it. Okay, so we'll make a mask for half of the O, roughly around where it starts here. We can feather it just subtly. And then we will keyframe the mask. We're not doing anything crazy here, but we go 1 frame forward, keyframe it out. Okay, so now you have 1, 2, 1, 2. You can see right here how it kind of acts a little weird. If you want to go in here and kind of correct that to make it look a little bit better, that's fine. But usually if it doesn't look bad. It's what it is. So now, again, following the same principles, 2 frames between each letter, 3 frames between each word. I'm going to go through here and do all of this animation using the same technique, and I'll come back in just a minute. Again, I will time it so you can see exactly how little time this takes. I'm back. Now, as you can see, we now have all these layers in order. And the cool thing about it, again, is that you literally just go through and you're pressing page down to move forward a frame or 2 frames, depending. Control-Shift-D to split a layer. And then clicking on the left side of the split layer and deleting that. And it makes it very quick. Look at that. Look at that. How long did it take me to animate that? Let's see. Let's drag it in here. Drag this puppy in here. 7 minutes. Okay. And I kind of messed up there in the middle. So roughly about 6 minutes. So 6 minutes to animate it. 5 minutes to draw it if it's something as simple as this. Okay, and you can change the speed of this. You can mess around with time remapping. You can add, the jitter effect if you wanted to. But it's handwritten and it doesn't look crappy. Look at that. Okay, so here it is dropped into the composition. Now, the thing about it is it looks realistic, right? There's no portions of the text that are being overlaid in the masking process because it's pin stroke by pin stroke. You're not having to use a bunch of complicated maps and masks to figure out how to make something look like it's actually being written on. And the ability to separate the layers and the ability to basically do whatever you want to with the text, whatever style, whatever it might be. And you're looking at 12 to 15 minutes of work just to get to this side of the animation being done. Now, let's take this a step further and actually go into compositing and do what we want to with it before leaving it here. And then I'll be right back. Okay, so here it is with a couple of effects thrown on it, just kind of making it look a little bit decent here. Again, this is just kind of like a handwritten, jittery, texture filled kind of style here. It looks decent, right? It's got some body to it. It's got a realistic writing pattern to it. With whatever project it is, I would put a lot more time into, getting all the other animations right in this, doing a better kind of background, all sorts of stuff like that. But for just the time being, we're just focusing on the handwritten animation aspect of this. So this is just to show you, what you can do with it, and teach you the principles of it. But I think the best thing about this method is the flexibility. You're not limited to, one layer of text that you're trying to figure out how to manipulate. You can really get creative in your pen strokes. And it doesn't just apply to handwritten text. You could handwrite a logo. You could handwrite, the possibilities are endless. But hopefully this tutorial format gave you a kind of why behind the how effect, so that you're not just following the tutorial and going back over and over again to watch it and follow it step by step each time. Because the reason for these tutorials is to teach you the techniques of it and show you why they work, how they work, the ins and outs of it, and allow you to apply them and not just doing this specific effect, but doing a multitude more. I don't want you to just be able to accomplish this frame that you're seeing before you after you watch this tutorial. I want you to be able to do 15, 20, 35, 40, 50 more effects just by watching this tutorial and adapting those concepts that you learned into other parts of your work, right? So think outside of the box, pay attention to the techniques, not to follow step by step, but to apply them in any way you can that would benefit you as a filmmaker. Once again, thank you for visiting Filmfluence. Leave a comment below on any parts of your filmmaking career, especially in the editing department, of things you're struggling with, things you don't quite know much about or you want to know more about, or things that you just don't see very many explanations out there on why or how these things are done. Pop a comment down below, let me know, and I will streamline a tutorial. Keep an eye out for the next video, should be coming out shortly. And don't forget, you really shouldn't subscribe. And you definitely don't need to enable notifications, because you 100% without a doubt do not want to see more tutorials like this popping up on your YouTube. That would just be ridiculous. It's stupid. Why would you do that? Don't do it.